first of all, if those haven't met the speakers, most of our speakers are up here today, right now. I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, all but 4. I don't know. Oh, there you go. All but 3. Who's missing? Joe's out here, so he can answer a question if he wants to. I don't know, there's a couple other guys that are actually not here. Eric is in the back. He can answer a question if you want to. And I thought we had 14. So
one person fell off.
I can't think who we're missing. I'm going to go really quickly. Like, give me like 15 seconds, 30 seconds. Tell me, Mike Wood down at the end started. Who you are?
I am Mike Wood. I work for Resurgent Capital Services, and I'm a Windows Azure MVP.
Chandler Dahl, work for RIA Consulting, Microsoft MVP for C#.
Jason Follis, I work for Proficient and technical architect.
Brian Prince, work for Microsoft. I'm the principal cloud evangelist for US.
Jennifer Marsman, I work for Microsoft as a principal developer evangelist.
Brent Steinman, I work for Sagetti. I'm a Microsoft MVP.
Mark Stanislav, I'm a senior consultant with Networks Group.
Dennis Burton, Microsoft MVP. I spend my time on the fringes. I have as many Azure deployments as I do Azure.
Michael Collier, Windows Azure MVP and a national architect with New Desert.
I'm David Giard. I'm a principal Azure consultant for Sagetti and Microsoft MVP.
Jeff Knuckles, I work for Microsoft on the Windows Azure team.
And just real quickly, other speakers here, Eric?
I'm Eric Boyd. I'm a consultant in Chicago.
Okay. Joe? Represent. Introduce yourself. Swallow.
Hi.
All right, that's Joe Kunk.
Hi, I'm Joe Kunk. I'm a Microsoft MVP in Visual Basic. I dabble in Azure, and that's it.
Okay, and I don't see John Farringer in the room, but John Farringer is the Office 365 guy. He's a consultant with TCR as well. So a good group of people here. So I'll start off with one question here. I'd like somebody give me an example of a project that does not fit Azure, that I shouldn't even think about Azure. You know, what's a red flag that when I don't want Azure?
GPU dependent processing.
What do
You've got something that's dependent on a GPU.
Okay.
So I had a client that wanted to port a graphics program up, but they had to have a GPU, a hardware-bound piece of, something sitting in the machine they were rendering it. Azure is trying to abstract you away from hardware dependencies, so trying to turn around and insert that back into the platform. To me, that'd be an immediate red flag. You want to remove any hardware dependencies.
Yes. Right?
I was going to do the easy one of PCI compliance. Anything to do with credit cards, and if you have to follow a PCI audit, then you're going to have to go to a hybrid architecture.
Is that because you're sacrificing control? And
it doesn't fit the letter of the law.
The PCI forbids cloud computing?
The way it's written.
It's not that it explicitly says cloud will not work.
Yeah.
It's worded in a manner that virtualization makes it very, very difficult.
So the next time the PCI Council meets 2013, at that time they'll be able to start maybe putting some of this on the books in actual terms that we can use.
Yeah.
So.
Right.
Also throw in there platform friction, right? It's a lot easier to deploy a Rails application to Roku or Engine Yard than it is to deploy it to Azure. And Rails runs a lot quicker in those environments than it does on Windows.
Yeah, here's another. So the question is, what's not a good fit for Azure?
Yeah, let's start with that.
If it's running on any of those other cloud platforms I didn't mention, it should be running on Azure, but.
That's a sales guy.
That's a sales guy, right? No, but obviously, if it requires a Unix-based operating system that's not supported in Azure, that's the simple rules of thumb. You can take a look at today with PaaS.
PaaS is
platform as a service. Today, I should say that commercial off-the-shelf products probably not an ideal fit. Although there's always the workarounds with startup scripts and pre-install type stuff and VM roles.
Okay.
But infrastructure as a service certainly changing the game on that.
Okay.
To add to what Brent said, I find it very similarly, but it's not just GPU, it's anything that has very specific requirements for hardware. So the client I was working with had very specific requirements for the CPU in terms of they had a process that wasn't distributable across multiple cores. And so with Azure, we can only get 1.6 gigahertz in a CPU in a single core. And so they can't really scale that up to 4 gigahertz CPU like they would do on premise.
Isn't that just the way the application is written, that it wasn't written to take?
It is. Their algorithms was doing a so this is also an interesting scenario where they had a big data problem on premise that data changed frequently, plus a high performance computing problem, and those two together also cause some challenges if that data changes frequently and I need it on the print. Its bandwidth may not solve the problem.
I see.
They may have a little bit of it. And so in their scenario, it just didn't work. And their algorithms, their big algorithms, weren't distributable. Because they depended on input from previous results and stuff like that. So that's a scenario that for me that didn't work.
Yeah. Do you have a new question, or do you want to add to this position?
No. I have one question.
Yeah.
How do we test the performance for the Azure applications, Azure services? Because we have separate Azure cloud, cloud in private, cloud in local, and separate we are deploying somewhere else. Third-party vendor, right?
Okay, that's a good question. Let me rephrase it. So you're asking how can we do performance testing before deploying to production in the cloud?
Right.
Who wants to take that? We've got an infrastructure guy here. That's good for him.
So the,
Who wants it?
I can start with the simplest thing. So there is a staging environment as well in the cloud. So before end users are actually looking at your stuff, you have the choice to deploy to staging or production. So you can push to a staging environment, which will be using like actual hardware in the data center and such, but it won't be available. The way staging works is it's actually going to be put up there as some long GUID.cloudapp.net as opposed to your actual service name. So what you could do is push it to staging, do performance testing in that environment because you're testing the actual environment of the cloud, and then when you're ready, put it in production, and then it will be available for everyone to see at your final URL.
Is there will be cost for the staging environment?
Yes, there is a cost for the staging environment. So,
performance test will do multiple times, right? Whenever deploying, so cost will be more in that case.
right. Well, what we do have is we have a free trials available for Azure, so you can use some of those free hours that are available to do performance testing to see if it's a good fit before you fully commit to Azure. If that's one mechanism that some customers have used. So you use that, do performance testing, see kind of see how things are playing out, if that makes sense. But there's ways to kind of get some free hours, enough to do some basic testing.
Do you have MSDN?
MSDN hours, there are free hours for
This
MSDN.
Spark has stuff too. And that's a good segue into when you're doing those kinds of tests. The term when you work, especially with the Microsoft architecture, you'll often hear tossed out, is establishing a scale unit. Okay, so while you may not be able to use something like the free trials or MSDN or BizSpark to do a complete, 200,000 user stress load test, what you will be able to do is say, given the resources I have, I can establish a scale unit, which is the combination of resources, the size of those resources, to support, say, 1,000 users. And it gives you a basis for multiplication to say, okay, when I go to 10,000, I take that number and multiply by 10. It gets you a step closer. It's still not a substitute for doing that full 100,000 to make sure the system doesn't crumble, but at least gets you a step in that direction. And unfortunately, at least in my opinion, if you're going to deploy it in Azure, you need to be doing your load test and your stress tests in that environment because of the commodity hardware, the latencies within the data center. There's no easy way to replicate that on-premise. And even when I'm telling developers, test your code local, develop it local, test it, host it. Have your own developer sandbox before you put it in a staging environment or into production.
Another important aspect is Mike's got a session at the end of the day on service management and diagnostics. Understanding how to get your perf counters out of Azure for a lot of servers is going to be really important. That'll probably be a session that'll be really good for it.
And the other thing I'll throw out there is you asked the question, do I have to pay for that staging, right? And people go, oh, yeah, I got to pay for that. It's like, well, are you saying that you're not going to do performance testing on your on-premise, right? How did you do it before? You ordered servers, you brought them in, you ran it, and then you looked at it and said, oh, it's good or it's bad. Now I got to order more servers, right? This is still could be a cheaper option for you to spin those servers up, run your tests for a few hours, and drop them, right? Number one, you'll get them out the door faster, right? And number two, it may be less than the capital outlay of bringing all these servers in just to find out that you over-purchased, right? So there's other reasons. Yes, you have to pay, but I think it's worth it.
Once you've gone to production, how many times have you been in this scenario? Jay and I have done this in the past. Production environment was 8 servers, 3 application servers, 2 database servers. And then the staging environment that we tested from that point forward was 2 web servers, 1 application server, 1 database server. We never got to test it in the exact same environment ever again. So with the cloud environment, you can spin that up. With the cloud environment, you can spin that up and test in the exact same scenario and shut it down when you're done.
Are there SQL specific, Azure specific load testing tools available?
Question was, are there load testing tools that are specifically designed for Windows Azure?
Tools that run in it, like there are services like, was it Loadstorm?
Loadstorm, yeah,
And
really good.
what's the other one? So there's a couple of them out there that are cloud-based load testing tools where they can use the cloud to scale quickly to test
Which
services.
becomes interesting, right? If you use something like LoadRunner, it can be really expensive to get a lot of users up and running. Tools like Loadstorm allow you to put a ton of users against your application and basically pay as a service, shut it down when you're done.
And aside from the license, because the licensing when I was at ePrize, we didn't want to go that route per se, so because money costs money. So we did a couple options. Our Apache JMeter is a good bench test suite, and then also Multi-Mechanize is a Python application, and then there's also Sung. So all of these things, those are all free options that you can do some decent load balancing, spin up Rackspace Cloud or EC2 or whatever, and then test against another cloud provider. We actually filtered out which cloud provider we wanted to go to with ePrize by testing them against each other and see how many instances we got back that failed. And so that's a good way to do it.
Question.
What about the portability, like from one cloud to next cloud? If let's say I already have in Azure and I want to go to Amazon or move between the clouds, or after 1 year I decided, okay, I don't want to go to the cloud. Can I use the same code back in there? Is there some open source or something like some standards maintained in the
what platform are you developing on?
Right now, I mean,
let me repeat the question if you don't mind. Tell me if I got it right. So your question is, if I start developing and deploying to one of the cloud vendors, whether that's Azure, Amazon, Google, or whatever, and then later on I decide I want to switch to another platform, how hard is that? What are the issues? Can I do it?
The issues can we do that? It's a total rewrite of the code, or is there some standards we can follow in the industry?
So can I do it? And if so, how hard is it? How expensive?
It depends.
There you go. It depends. Next question.
So you're developing the application, right? It's your app. You're making a decision about what interactions you're going to have with the platform that you're developing for. Every time you hook into that, you're building in a dependency. You're creating a lock-in. You can easily take an application, segment away all those operating level dependencies. Okay, take the operating system. Don't write directly to the registry entry. Use a provider that does that for you. Don't write directly to the file system. Use a provider there. Abstract those away. That core should be multi-platform, all right? But it's those pieces around it where you reach out and you interact, whether it's writing to Azure Diagnostics, whether it's writing to Azure Drive, whatever the service may be. Every time you make the decision to put one of those in, you're the one that's saying, I'm going to lock that feature in.
And if you write that layer of abstraction, you're adding cost too, so there are choices to make.
Yeah, if you said my session, you heard everything about layers of abstraction, interaction. That's definitely one of them. Just like I think Brent just suggested it too. It's just, take a look, especially for existing applications, you're going to do this anyway. But you're going to want to build effectively anything that writes it. Look, there's an SDK for Amazon EC2, right? For S3 or whatever else that you're talking from the AWS services. Same thing's true for Azure. Pretty much anybody who's having a cloud option like that, there's going to be that SDK. So anything associated with that SDK, isolate that. Make that an abstracted layer. Create an object that pretty much interfaces to your UI or to your other business objects that are supported. And keep that there. That way you can make, that will be effectively your hot swap option. Because think about it. Anytime you write to storage, whether it's S3 or Azure Tables, I mean, you're using those APIs. That's clearly where it's going to happen at most cases for most apps. So extract it away.
Just to tag onto that, the specific example of moving from, let's say, Amazon to Azure, which I encourage you all to do, it's not about necessarily picking up your code and moving it, because it's such a different paradigm that there's a lot more involved than just moving
question was actually, is there any standard in the industry
that
everybody's trying to follow, like Azure or...
There are a few
well, so the question was, is there an industry standard for these APIs? And
so that
Brian quickly answered no.
Portability between the clouds. Like, I think
there's an open source movement to get to not a standard API, but a fairly common use, because it's community driven, right? It's open source. They're like, let's get these. But the problem with those, not that there's a big problem with using them, but you're going to end up having that lowest common denominator. right? So it's only going to be the functionality that all of them do, or some platforms will support some features and some won't. And so you may code to that API and then go to move just to realize that that platform doesn't support the feature that you're using, and you're back to square one.
Yep.
So.
But I think to be fair, we've also, database abstraction libraries. I can write code that will run on MS SQL, MySQL, Oracle, and we've gotten past some of those situations
That's because
before.
there haven't been any new
so.
features since 1977. I mean, the cloud ships new features every 3 damn months. You know,
Well, things like
the bread's not baked.
cloud supports almost real time, pretty much, between about 4 or 5 different cloud vendors. So it's pretty good. I mean, for a community effort.
Yeah, and this does bring up the other interesting point. I forget who I heard this from once, but they said hosting applications is a commodity. Okay, and we've seen this. Amazon and Azure have been doing these price war. Compute prices keep coming down. Bandwidth prices keep coming down. That core service is a commodity resource. It's hosting an application. That's all it is. It's in a VM. That's a common platform between the both of them. Where all these vendors come in and where they're competing with is the services they're offering around that. How does Azure Table Storage differ from Amazon's the last block stuff? Yeah, it's how do that's what they're trying to do is one up each other by continually introducing new features. So that complicates this idea of trying to have a single unified API that everybody's answering to.
But I think if you were to look at it and say, my app is a standard CRUD app, I just need to host it in IIS somewhere, and it writes to a database. I think you could probably port them back and forth fairly easily, but then eventually you're going to hit some feature that you want, and you're going to have the problem of, do we move or not?
Yeah, it's the same story with Java app servers. Right, the
there's
right
some
one's
enough
ported everywhere.
Right to Azure.
That never fully materialized in Java for these same reasons. Each app service kind of went in their own direction, and you would pick one based on the flavor you liked. And this whole write it once, run it anywhere thing never really happened. So there's a lot of people talking about this, and not very many people doing it.
But you're definitely not the first person to ask. There are
Probably the second.
Okay, I've got a question. Richard Miga in the back has a question.
This one may sound like a far-fetched question.
Richard?
Not from you, man.
And if it's about the appliance, I have a throat punch waiting.
Should we explain to
where we're
everybody?
going next? It's about, if you take the scenario we're on, will the cloud become a regulated utility in our society?
The question was,
What's your opinion?
what's the opinion of the panel on whether or not the government's going to step in and start regulating cloud services?
Can they tax it?
No, because we just moved it. If you remember the Seattle issue.
Yeah, the Quincy, Washington data center was it that got moved to Texas? Yeah.
Do you envision it?
I don't envision it. No. I mean, from Microsoft's perspective, no. We're a private organization. We're gonna, these are our data centers. We own all of our own fiber. We don't lease it from anybody. We don't take it from the government. I mean, if anything, we support them. But
The electricity manufacturers way back when is about, this
Right.
is our stuff. You can't take it, but
Right.
and regulated utility.
not gonna say they won't try. But
Wouldn't they do that to the web before they do it to it specifically?
yeah, it would stifle innovation. I think in more ways than I can probably count.
Yeah, once they figure out how to tax your online purchases, then they can move on to that.
Okay, I think people their opinion is probably not.
Just a general question. A lot of people have concerns about security.
I don't think that's true. I think most people don't care.
Moving data from a site to to the cloud. Should people be concerned about medical records, financial records? People that thought that somebody, like if something happens that your money's not.
Okay, so I think I'll paraphrase that and say, you say, or should people be concerned about moving private data around security? Of course people are concerned. The question is, how concerned should they be, I guess?
Well, is it
what is the risk?
Or
And what can the sales guys say to make me feel better?
And there's a session later on.
Yeah, what time is Brian's session?
Yeah, it's later.
So can I jump on that one, Dave?
Absolutely.
So this morning in the keynote, I talked about thinking about cloud computing more as a financial institution rather than as a utility model. If we take that a step further and we look at a bank filling up an ATM, do they take the bank vault to the ATM? No, they're not taking everything to the cloud or everything out to that ATM. What they're going to do is they take just what they need and they're going to put it in a container that is a mixture of security, speed, and mobility to perform the job that's at hand. And we think about putting data in the cloud, don't throw the whole data warehouse at it. Look at what am I trying to do? What do I need to put in there to do that job? And you may need to make an intelligent decision that says, you know, I'm dealing with PII, maybe it's healthcare or something else. I either can't due to regulatory standards or I just am not comfortable putting it up in there. I'll leave that on premise, but maybe the app gets a token in their data store that says, if you read this token, come back on prem and ask me what that token means if you need it. It's a decision you need to make as an architect to say where that stuff has to live. You should be very conscious of it, but you shouldn't be afraid of it.
We come at that from a different angle too. Is it did some applications that actually went on Microsoft.com. It was about 8 years ago, and it had to go through a security review. Those guys are really good. They know what they're doing, right? I mean, somebody that if they can come in and deface Microsoft.com or Amazon.com, they made it a name for themselves for life. So they're probably better at it than any of us.
Yeah, the analogy, the thing that I would use, I picked this up recently. So this stuff runs in the same data centers as other Microsoft properties like
Xbox, Bing.
Yep.
Microsoft.
So from the data center perspective, think about this. Think about how long Windows Update has been around. Think about what would happen if somebody were to breach Windows Update and push a malicious update around the world. That's never happened. Now, I mean, we might get updates that like screw up our machines because it just sucks, but that's a different issue. That's not a breach of Windows Update. So, just an easy way to think about that and the security of the physical data centers.
So, just really quick on that whole topic of P2 or HIPAA compliance stuff. We are moving in that direction for those workloads and scenarios, and we do have workarounds to facilitate that. And I can take some of those questions offline, but I would encourage anybody. Security is a big, broad topic, so I would certainly defer to Brian's session later. But on the compliance issues and stuff like that, yes, yes, and yes across the board.
Mike would have something real quick, and then we're going to go to the next question. I have about 5 minutes left.
The analogy that was used about the bank, I think, is a good one. So for your question, if people are concerned about moving forward, and then the other gentleman's question in the back of where do we see this going in the future, right? A long, long time ago, people were faced with the idea, do I take the money that I've earned from out underneath my bed and go put it in this building where someone else is guarding it, someone else is watching it, right? And very early on, those got robbed a lot, right? People, not sure, but over time, they improved their security where it was better than yours, right? Microsoft, as the gentleman back here has pointed out, they've had a lot of practice securing data. All the vendors have, right? Or the majority of them, the big names, right? Over time, you're going to see government institute, not necessarily laws, but bring forth things that are like, look, we need to make sure that there's some level, whether it's PCI compliance, which isn't actually a government layout, but for HIPAA and those kinds of things, you're going to see those drive the vendors to produce things that answer those. And so more and more people will become a lot more comfortable with it. I mean, look at FSMA. Microsoft released Office 365 for basically government. So they've got certain levels that they have to meet. Eventually, those levels will surpass what most businesses really need at the security level.
All right, let's take our last question here, Andy.
I was just adding something I wanted to add. Sorry. Someone from my company had gone to a conference, and it was the 3-letter agencies, the governmental agencies. They really like the cloud better than just everybody else having their own data center and doing security that way. From a security standpoint, I mean, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, they know security. They can hire people that are experts at security.
Yeah, there's this perception that this server sitting under my secretary's desk is somehow more secure than a data center locked up in suburban Chicago. Yeah. Back.
From a developer's perspective, this question's about Azure tables and SQL Azure.
Okay, this will be the last question. Right.
Pardon me?
This will be the last question.
Okay. So obviously, I understand scalability, performance, all those things, price, Azure table. From a developer's perspective, how much more complex is it to develop using the Azure tables versus just standard SQL Azure?
As complicated as you want to make it. Azure tables are simple.
Would there be a preference?
It's a very simple access mechanism, and if you want to use it for simple things, it's easy to wrap your head around. If you're wanting to go clear down and let's say look up something like CQRS, those are starting getting very complex patterns built on that very simple access system. So it can be as simple or as complex as you need it to be. You have to look at what you're trying to do. Is that the right tool for that job or not?
But I can apply CQRS.
Let me just, I just want to repeat the question real quick, which is, the question is, I'm considering both Azure Storage and and SQL Azure. Which is more complicated, which is hard? How do I balance that? How do I make the decision? Yeah, sorry about that. Go ahead, Henry.
I was just going to say, I can apply those patterns as well to, it doesn't matter what the storage mechanism is. It really comes down to what I need to do with my data, how I need to scale my data, because I could run into the same kind of complexities architecturally with SQL Azure if I need to build in a bunch of partitions and federations and stuff like that I would have with Azure Table Storage.
You talk about developer storage, so I would say that the tooling around SQL Azure, which is SQL Server, is much richer, right? You get Entity Framework and Hibernate, Management Studio, things like that, and you're used to those tools, you know that. So you're going to be more productive. Azure Tables has some very unique strengths, but there's not a lot of rich tooling around it. It's a REST head interface. Knock yourself out. And queryability, I think, is the other big dial. How do you really need to query it or not? Is it going to meet your needs? Or kind of the two big. So there's going to be a learning curve to adopt tables because you're learning something new, there's a new API, things like that. It comes down to critical thought as what's the right tool for the job.
So it depends.
To the defense of Azure Table Storage, it's easier because you really don't need to do all that in case of Azure Storage, right? If you have something in your SQL Server, you have to use an ORM to convert it over. In that case, you really don't need to do that. So I've got a talk coming up, and I can show you how easy it is to develop on that.
Okay. And then also cost is certainly a factor. Yeah. SQL Azure is much more expensive than Azure Table Storage. I'm going to cut it off right here. However, these guys, most of them are going to stick around the rest of the day, and I really encourage you to grab them and make them earn their pay, which, by the way, is $0. Free lunch. It's a good lunch. Yeah, they got a good lunch out of it. That's I'm very grateful. I thank them very much, and I think you guys should.